There are moments in Hollywood when the cameras stop rolling, but the story only gets darker. A quiet sidewalk, a man walking calmly, a bag over his shoulder. No rush, no panic, no visible emotion. This is not a movie scene. This is the final public footage of Nick Reiner hours before everything changed forever. What began as a shocking headline has slowly turned into one of the most disturbing, emotionally complex cases Hollywood has ever faced. And now, with new video surfacing, the questions are getting heavier, not lighter. Because if this footage is real, and investigators believe it, is then nothing about that night was sudden. It was silent, it was controlled, and it had been building for years. Before we dive deeper, subscribe for more fame insights. Because this story isn't just about what happened, it's about how it happened, and why so many warning signs went unnoticed. The video itself is unsettling because of how ordinary it looks. Nick Reiner walks at an unhurried pace near his parents' Brentwood home. His posture is relaxed. His movements are deliberate. There is no visible distress, no sign of panic, nothing that suggests chaos waiting just ahead. Investigators say this footage was captured only hours before the incident inside the house. That detail alone has changed how authorities and the public view everything that followed. This was not someone spiraling outwardly. This was someone holding everything in, quietly. When the news first broke, Hollywood froze. The names involved didn't feel real. Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker, he was a constant. Decades of work, decades of respect, decades of stability. Michelle Reiner was known privately as the steady center of their family, someone who kept everything grounded when the industry became overwhelming. The idea that something violent could happen inside their home felt impossible to many who knew them. In the earliest hours, speculation filled the silence. People searched for explanations that felt easier to accept. A medical emergency, a misunderstanding, a situation that spiraled too fast to control, anything that didn't involve intention. But investigators moved carefully, and as they did, certain details became impossible to ignore. One of the first confirmations quietly shifted the entire case. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken doors, no damaged locks, no indication that someone had entered unwillingly. That single fact narrowed everything. Whoever was involved didn't need to break in. They had access. They were familiar with the home. That realization sent a chill through Hollywood circles. Conversations changed tone. This was no longer about an outside threat. It was about something deeply internal. As days passed, authorities confirmed the incident was not confined to a single moment. Forensic timelines suggested escalation rather than sudden collapse. What initially shocked Hollywood was now unsettling it. The story wasn't resolving. It was deepening, and with every new detail, it became clearer that this tragedy had roots stretching far back. Long before that final night, investigators believe the tension that defined this case didn't begin inside the Brentwood home. It may have started hours earlier, at a place that was supposed to feel safe. Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party was known as one of Hollywood's most relaxed gatherings. No cameras, no press, just familiar faces and easy laughter. Rob and Michelle Reiner arrived with Nick, hoping the comfort of people he knew might help steady him. At first, nothing seemed openly wrong, but several guests later said they felt something shift as the night went on. Nick didn't blend into the room. He stayed close to walls, hovered at the edges of conversations, and watched people instead of engaging naturally. His energy felt tense, unpredictable, not aggressive but unsettling enough to stand out. Witnesses recalled Nick approaching guests abruptly, asking flat, uncomfortable questions that didn't match the mood of the evening. "What's your full name? Are you famous?" The questions weren't hostile, but they lacked warmth or context. People answered politely, then drifted away. Some exchanged uneasy looks. Others mentioned later that something about his presence felt off. Rob noticed. Michelle noticed. Rob was seen keeping a quiet watch on his son, stepping in when conversations became awkward. Michelle tried to smooth things over with smiles and gentle redirects. By the end of the night, the family left earlier than planned. To most guests, it was just an uncomfortable moment, but investigators now believe whatever Nick was carrying that night didn't stay at the party. It followed him home. What happened after the party is known only through fragments, reconstructed by investigators using timelines, witness statements, and later evidence. The drive back to the Brentwood home was not calm. Authorities believe the tension that surfaced at the party followed the family into the car. Arguments don't always end when the music stops, and in this case, they may have intensified once the doors closed and the outside world disappeared. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled voices around midnight, nothing loud enough to trigger concern, nothing that suggested violence, just the sound of a family disagreement late at night. At the time, it blended into the background of a quiet neighborhood. In hindsight, it became one of the most haunting details of the case. Investigators say the incident inside the home likely occurred between midnight and the early morning hours. There were no signs of forced entry because none were needed. Whoever moved through that house did so with familiarity. The layout, the routines, the rhythms of the home were already known. That detail reshaped the investigation. This was not chaos spilling in from the outside. It was something unfolding within. Forensic teams believe the situation escalated rather than exploded. Not a sudden break, but a slow build that reached a point of no return. Inside a house that had once been a place of safety, everything quietly changed. As investigators examined the scene, early assumptions began to fall apart. Initial reports hinted at a single sudden act, something that happened in the heat of a moment. That version didn't last. A preliminary forensic review revealed a far more complicated picture. Evidence suggested multiple serious injuries, not one isolated event. That distinction mattered more than many realized. Forensic experts explain that situations like this don't unfold instantly. They require proximity, sustained effort, and time. Professor Joseph Scott Morgan later emphasized that repeated injuries often indicate deliberate action rather than an uncontrollable emotional snap. These are not moments that happen by accident. They unfold gradually, step by step. Investigators also noted the absence of chaos at the scene. This wasn't a space torn apart by panic. It was described as controlled, methodical, and disturbingly quiet. That finding pushed the case further away from theories of confusion or misunderstanding. Instead, it pointed toward intention. Experts were careful to explain that real-life incidents rarely resemble what audiences see in films. Anger is not always explosive or fast. Often, it is slow, personal, and sustained. That reality made the case even harder to process. What happened inside the Reiner home was not a split-second tragedy. It was something that developed over time, leaving investigators with a chilling conclusion. This was not sudden. What unsettled investigators most was not only what happened inside the home, but what came next. Based on security records and surveillance data, authorities placed Nick Reiner in Santa Monica around 4 a.m., roughly 20 minutes from Brentwood. He was seen checking into a hotel quietly, without drawing attention. Staff later described him as calm and reserved. There were no frantic calls, no visible distress, nothing that suggested immediate crisis. According to investigators, this period became critical in understanding his state of mind. Experts believe Nick may have attempted to clean himself up either before leaving the house or later at the hotel. Despite that, authorities say traces of evidence could still remain on clothing or skin. Surveillance cameras tracked his movements through Santa Monica that morning, painting a picture of someone moving with purpose rather than confusion. What stood out was the composure. To many observers, this behavior did not align with someone experiencing a sudden break from reality. The silence of those early morning hours became as important to the investigation as the noise that had come before. Later that day, another piece of the timeline emerged. Around 9 p.m., a surveillance camera at an Arco gas station near Exposition Park captured Nick Reiner on video. He was seen buying a sports drink, a small, ordinary action that took on enormous weight once the context became clear. He paced slightly while inside the store, scanning the area, appearing restless but controlled. What struck investigators and viewers alike was what the footage did not show. There was no visible panic, no frantic movements, no outward signs of someone unraveling. He completed the purchase calmly and exited without incident. Commentators later pointed out how disturbingly normal the moment looked. If you didn't know what had already happened, nothing about the footage would seem remarkable. Without resistance, footage from the arrest shows officers calmly surrounding him. There was no panic, no struggle, and no attempt to flee. Authorities later confirmed that he went into custody willingly. The lack of resistance immediately became a point of interest for investigators. It suggested a level of emotional detachment rather than chaotic fear or desperation. Witnesses described his expression as hollow, drained, neither angry nor frightened, but exhausted. It was the look of someone who had carried an immense burden internally and had reached a point of surrender. Every movement appeared measured, deliberate, as if he were functioning on autopilot. For investigators, this calmness was unsettling. It challenged typical assumptions about behavior after a violent incident. People often imagine visible turmoil, erratic actions, or emotional outbursts. Here, none of that was present. Instead, it was quiet, controlled, methodical, and in its own way, even more chilling than panic could have been. The surrender, calm and detached, left authorities and observers grappling with a critical question. What had already shifted within him before law enforcement even arrived? Shortly after his arrest, records revealed that he secured one of the country's top defense attorneys. The speed of the decision left many people shocked. This attorney is known for handling complex, high-profile cases, and the fees alone can reach staggering amounts. Observers immediately questioned how the legal representation was funded. It became clear that family resources were being used to cover the costs. That revelation fueled public debate almost overnight. The accused did not have an independent financial base, and his previous work had been limited and closely tied to family projects. For many, the optics were jarring. A son accused of unimaginable actions mounting a defense using funds tied to the very people at the center of the tragedy. Experts noted that such a situation was unusual, even if legally permissible. The choice to provide high-end legal representation so quickly suggested careful planning and access to considerable family wealth. While authorities could not confirm every detail, the timing and nature of the move only added layers to a story already heavy with tension. Questions of loyalty, responsibility, and morality began to swirl publicly, even as the legal process quietly moved forward. The tragedy at the Brentwood home did not happen in a vacuum. For years, the family had been quietly navigating struggles that few outside their circle could fully understand. The accused had been battling substance use from a young age, with early experimentation eventually spiraling into a long-term pattern. His parents had tried repeatedly to guide and support him, sending him to treatment programs, encouraging creative projects, and maintaining hope even through repeated relapses. Friends and colleagues recall a young man whose charm and talent were evident, but whose struggles often shadowed his presence. He had periods of apparent recovery, including involvement in family projects that mirrored his own experiences, bringing brief moments of hope. But by the months leading up to the incident, those efforts were faltering. Neighbors and friends noted increased unpredictability, sudden disappearances, late-night arguments, and erratic behavior that left even the closest family members concerned. The night of the final incident had begun as a seemingly ordinary family evening. An event meant to offer joy and comfort became, in hindsight, the spark that led to a collapse. Observers at the gathering noted tension and discomfort, subtle signs of an emotional storm gathering strength. After leaving the event, the family returned home, unknowingly entering the moments that would lead to irreversible consequences. Authorities later confirmed that the individual involved had intimate knowledge of the home, including routines, layout, and access points. No forced entry was necessary. The incident unfolded between midnight and early morning hours, a prolonged event involving repeated actions rather than a single, explosive moment. Forensic specialists emphasized the methodical nature of the act, noting multiple injuries that indicated deliberate intent. The home, a place meant to provide stability, had transformed into a controlled, personal scene of violence. Even as law enforcement pieced together the timeline, questions about motive and mental state loomed large. Friends of the family described a man whose behavior had become increasingly detached and erratic. Witness statements and surveillance footage indicated that he maintained composure after the incident, including checking into a nearby hotel and conducting ordinary actions with deliberate care. Each step seemed to confirm that he was not acting purely on sudden emotion. Instead, he appeared emotionally hollow, carrying the weight of years of unresolved struggles. The speed with which high-profile legal counsel was secured added to the complexity of public perception. Family resources were reportedly used to cover legal fees, raising debates about privilege, morality, and responsibility. The public was left with difficult questions. How much of this tragedy was shaped by long-term struggles? What role did wealth and access play in the defense strategy? And how do observers reconcile the extraordinary calm in surveillance footage with the devastating events inside the home? The incident became more than a private tragedy. It sparked reflection within the entertainment industry about pressure, privilege, and the often invisible struggles behind public success. Colleagues described disbelief and grief. Those who had known the family personally expressed sorrow over how years of dedication and love had culminated in a single night of unimaginable loss. Experts noted that long-term addiction, emotional volatility, and unresolved trauma can create a perfect storm, an environment where tragedy becomes not just possible, but in hindsight, tragically predictable. The family's efforts to support, guide, and protect the individual were heroic in their persistence. They had offered repeated opportunities to rebuild, forgiveness for past mistakes, and space for growth. Yet the very structures meant to safeguard him, treatment programs, creative projects, and the family home, could not ultimately prevent the events that followed. This long history of struggle and attempted recovery became central to both the legal proceedings and public discourse. As the first court dates approached, questions surrounding intent, mental health, and accountability dominated every discussion. Experts in psychology and criminal behavior noted the delicate balance in assessing responsibility in cases where long-term struggles intersect with deliberate actions. Could years of substance use and mental health challenges influence intent? Or did the careful movements, control, and methodical behavior suggest awareness and premeditation? These questions would shape every stage of the legal battle. When the accused appeared in court for the first time, the weight of the case was immediately visible. Wearing a standard inmate uniform, he stood quietly beside his attorney, a figure known for handling the most high-profile and complex cases in the country. The courtroom was tightly controlled, with no live cameras allowed, heightening public curiosity and speculation. The initial hearing was brief but significant. The judge granted a postponement of formal arraignment to allow the defendant time to consider his next steps. In that moment, his demeanor, quiet, mechanical, almost hollow, again captured attention. When asked whether he would waive his right to a speedy trial, he responded with a short, flat, "Yes, Your Honor." No explanation, no emotion, just a measured, deliberate answer that left the room in heavy silence. The defense strategy, as early sources indicated, is likely to center on long-term mental health and substance use. Years of addiction, repeated treatment attempts, and emotional instability may be presented to argue impaired judgment or diminished capacity. High-profile defense attorneys are known for crafting narratives that introduce doubt without denying evidence, often relying heavily on expert testimony, scene reconstruction, and careful psychological analysis. Prosecutors, however, are expected to emphasize methodical actions, repeated injuries, and deliberate behavior, arguing that these details point toward awareness and control. Evidence gathered from surveillance footage, hotel check-ins, and biological traces strengthens the timeline and challenges claims of impulsive or accidental actions. Forensic findings indicate that the incident was sustained over hours, involved multiple deliberate steps, and required close proximity and coordination. The courtroom also highlights stark contrasts. The defendant, a man in his early 30s with years of privilege and access, facing the consequences of an act committed against parents he knew intimately. Age, experience, and access weigh heavily in legal analysis. Prosecutors are likely to focus on these factors, arguing that opportunity and understanding negate claims of sudden, uncontrollable impulse. Outside the courtroom, speculation and debate dominate public discussion. The story intertwines elements of fame, privilege, mental health, and tragedy, capturing attention far beyond typical cases. Colleagues and friends recall moments of charm and talent, shadowed by long-term struggles. Family history, prior rehabilitation efforts, and attempts at recovery all contribute to a complex picture that complicates public perception. Psychologists consulted by multiple sources describe the situation as a perfect storm, long-term instability, unresolved trauma, and substance use converging in a moment of catastrophic consequence. Legal analysts note that even with mitigating factors, California law provides little leniency in first-degree charges, involving multiple victims and sustained deliberate actions. If convicted, sentencing could range from decades to life without parole, underscoring the gravity of the proceedings. The upcoming trial promises to be intensely scrutinized, with each movement, statement, and piece of evidence examined under a national spotlight. Jury selection, witness testimony, and forensic reconstruction will shape the narrative for months, perhaps years to come. What remains clear is that the court process is not just about punishment. It is an attempt to understand how a combination of mental health struggles, family dynamics, and human decisions led to one of Hollywood's most haunting tragedies. By the time investigators pieced together the timeline, the full weight of that night became terrifyingly clear. What had seemed like an ordinary evening, the family home, the familiar rooms, the quiet routines, was instead the stage for a tragedy that had been silently building for years. Every step, every movement captured on surveillance footage, every calm gesture masked a reality more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The accused knew the house intimately, each hallway, each door, each room. No forced entry was required. The act itself was prolonged, deliberate, and precise. Forensic experts noted multiple injuries, each inflicted with intent and control. This was not a sudden outburst. It was a methodical, personal act that unfolded over hours, leaving a silence heavier than any sound. Even after leaving the scene, he moved through the world with measured detachment. Hotel check-ins, pacing at stores, and mundane tasks were carried out as though nothing had changed. The calmness was chilling, not innocence, not confusion, but exhaustion, emotional numbness, and the final echo of years of unresolved trauma. Every warning sign, every attempt at intervention, every act of care and support from his family had failed to prevent the inevitable. The discovery of the tragedy sent shockwaves through friends, colleagues, and the public. A family once defined by warmth, love, and legacy had been fractured in a single night. Hollywood's glamour and privilege could not shield them from pain. Those who had been untouchable in life now became a haunting reminder that tragedy can strike even in places meant for safety. And as the story came to light, one haunting question remained. How could a night that began so quietly, so familiarly unravel into irreversible loss? How could years of struggle, care, and intervention fail so catastrophically? Yet even after the facts were laid bare, the case refused to settle neatly into logic. What lingered was not just the evidence, but the silence around it, the unanswered questions that no courtroom argument could fully resolve. Those closest to the family spoke of a haunting realization that the warning signs, once scattered and ambiguous, now appeared painfully clear in hindsight. Moments that once felt isolated, missed calls, sudden mood shifts, strained conversations, began to connect into a pattern that no one had fully understood in time. Experts emphasize that long-term emotional instability often hides behind moments of normalcy. People learn to function, to smile, to appear composed, even as internal fractures widen. This ability to mask turmoil can be deeply misleading, especially within families where love and hope encourage belief in recovery. In this case, optimism became both a strength and a vulnerability, a reason to keep trying, but also a reason the danger went unrecognized until it was too late. As the legal process moves forward, the focus may remain on intent, responsibility, and consequence. But beyond the courtroom, a quieter reckoning unfolds. Families watching from afar are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about intervention, boundaries, and the limits of support. How much help is enough? When does compassion require distance? And at what point does hope become denial? The entertainment industry, too, has been left unsettled. This was not a distant headline. Involving strangers, it was a reminder that fame and access do not insulate against deeply human pain. Behind polished appearances and successful careers, private battles can rage unnoticed. Colleagues have spoken about the need for better mental health awareness, not as a public statement, but as a private responsibility shared by those closest to the struggle. What remains most haunting is the contrast. A family defined for years by unity and perseverance, undone in a single night shaped by unresolved suffering. The house, once a symbol of safety and continuity, now stands as a reminder of how fragile those ideals can be. No amount of success, money, or love could ultimately rewrite the outcome. And so the story lingers, not just as a case to be decided, but as a warning written in loss. A reminder that healing is not linear, that silence can be dangerous, and that the most devastating collapses often begin quietly, far from public view. In the end, this tragedy forces us to confront a difficult truth. Some storms build so slowly that by the time they are visible, there is no shelter left to reach.